Book 1, Chapter 2, My Childhood. Only a handful of beings have affected me so profoundly in this world. When I think about my current state of consciousness, I recall my paternal grandmother, my father, my mother, my ram, and most of all, you, Esevi, my brother. I want you to know that I love you beyond time, space, and to the stillness of all things, where there is only the now and time exists not. I love you beyond our competitive nature. I love you beyond that day when we both wanted so much to be right about the paragraph thing. I love you for rushing to me that day in the kitchen, going past me. I was not brave then. I could have prevented the pain you suffered, maybe. But yet, I just seized his hands, merely saying, "Can't you see he's hurt?" I'm crying now as I write these words. I have been trying so hard to follow a chronological order as I write this book. But emotions run deep. It looks like I'm failing miserably. Alright, I'm feeling better now. Less emotional, less crying. Why do I weep so? After all, you are here now. Images of that night you recall, November 6, 2009, flash before my mind's eye. You fighting for me again. Perhaps it is not all because I miss you. Perhaps part of the tears is because I really feel loved by you. You and I did everything together, climbing trees, fishing, eating certain types of insects, playing soccer, and swimming. That day at the lake, images just rush into my mind. The sun was shining beautifully, and we were in the sandy area on dry land. My eyes wandered from left to right. There was no one around but you, me, and one of the village children who was drowning. That day, do you remember when you saved him? Do you remember that I was afraid of the water when we were children? I still am. I cannot swim to save my soul. You jumped into the water without hesitation. You brought him out. I stood on the rocks by the bamboos to the right. You pumped his stomach, and water came out of his mouth. He breathed with a cough. Do you remember the stillness of the river? You, as you stood there, that would be one of my greatest memories. Even now, I can, I can still hear the placidity of the music of the river. I remember the look of you, a life saved. We would return home that evening with the silence of that day's accomplishment, but no one would ever know except us. This would be only one of our great adventures together. Oh, the Ghanaian guy, do you remember him? We were selling food for our wicked grandmother in the street in front of our house. We were standing up. Do you recall, mon cher frère? A Ghanaian man approached us from across the street. Are you twins? Yes, I nodded with my head jubilantly. Do you recall him giving us some money because he believed twins brought good luck? It was a lie, though it was a nod of the head. He wanted good luck, and I gave it to him. Do you also remember that auspicious day when you destroyed some of the mounted earth you erected with your agricultural tool? We were at the farm. Our grandmother, Amano, said something that upset you. She was whining without appreciating the work that we had done. I remember the way you walked away. We were in the middle of the field in Kusuntu. There was a surprised look on her face. I wish you would have ruined more of the mounted earth. I should have left with you, but I stayed with her in that smoldering heat till the evening. Do you recall her punishment? So many times we went to bed hungry because she refused to feed us. Huh. Oh, what about the time she refused me food for 3 days? You must recall how I handled it. As I think about this now, my mind is again full of images. I was in front of the kitchen. I had some cookware in my hand, which I bought with my own money from fishing. I uttered a few words to my grandmother, and I left the house. I went to the backyard, the field right behind the house. There was a lemon tree there, which is now gone. Under this tree were heavy rocks, piled up one against another. Put my cookwares, book one.
Excuse me, people. I don't know why I stopped. Me think I was on 5 minutes. I stopped too soon. Don't know why I did that. Let's try that.
Honey from fishing. I uttered a few words to my grandmother, and I left the house. I went to the backyard, the field right behind the house. There was a lemon tree there, which is now gone. Under this tree were heavy rocks, piled up one against another. Put my cookwares underneath it. You did not come with me, SAV, but do you remember that I too attempted to be brave? That first evening, I only had a shirt, which I took off to use as a sheet. I folded it and placed it on the thick, heavy rocks and slept on it. The rocks did a number to my back, but my determination was renewed when I woke up that morning thinking about how this woman really did not care about me. I made a fire by gathering a few rocks and some sticks. I cannot recall if I had matches. In any case, as I cooked my yams, the smoke of the fire rose above the sky. Several women passed, curiously looking at my direction. Excuse me, my grandfather must have known by this point that I was outside, but I do not recall seeing his face in the yard. My grandmother was in charge, controlling things. Such a short little person. She was not even 5 foot tall, but yet willed so much power in that household. How? I would learn the answer only when I became an adult. I walked to the left toward the big bread oven right next to the entrance of the house. I saw no one. I thought about going inside, but then remembered the firm words I had proffered to my grandmother. Day two came now, and I was starting to become accustomed to my new life. I was either 10 or 11 years old. I do not recall precisely, but I do remember that it was not long before I went to the United States of America. Smoke filled the morning sunny sky, and as usual, women passed through the backyard, heading to the market. Unpleasant words would be uttered about my grandmother. I would not hear them all, but would understand their general meaning. Day three came and went. I slept under the tree again. I planted some root vegetables. I was beginning to take pleasure in my new life when I began to hear talk around town. My return to the house was imminent. People in the village were complaining about how poorly my grandmother Amano was treating me. Once the whole village started talking, it was a done deal. During the entire time I resided in the backyard, my grandmother did not once come in to check on me. She simply did not care. Only embarrassment would render her to her knees. And that was exactly what transpired. She was summoned to appear before the king of Kusuntu. The king spoke about the accusation against her. She was compelled to kneel before him, and in that position she remained for hours. Upon returning from the king's house, she asked me to come back to the house. However, I would not go right away. Do you remember all this, Esivi? Well, you see, I can be as brave as you now. More mental pictures just rush into my head. There was an evening when a lot of people in the village would talk about. There was a party somewhere in Palime which you attended all alone. It was very late at night. I was impressed because you were only about 8 years old, but so audacious. Audacious. I thought at that time that you were different, bolder. Unlike you, I was ordinary and unadventurous. So I admired you that morning when everybody in the village was talking about it. The spring season, the spring seasons were the most memorable for us. We hunted delicacies together. We gathered little edible insects. Do you remember? The ones with wings. We roasted them on the open charcoal or wood fire, and they were succulent. I know you remember. We would take the little wings off and then roasted them until they were brown. Delicious. Haha. Our grandmother was not able to starve us in those days. She complained and complained, saying that the whole thing was disgusting, but they were so appetizing and tasty. There was a certain delicious, oily taste about the insects. No matter how much she complained, we went out and got more under rocks. Sometimes we went as far as Palime, the next village. I am smiling now. When I was not spending quality time with my brother, I was with my special friend, to whom I owe much of my spiritual growth today. I was about 8 or 9 years old when he came into my life. I was there when his mother gave birth to him. I used to feed him every day. I recalled many magical moments together where he showed me love. One of those times was on a Saturday morning. I passed my cousin Cujo's room to the right and opened the first door, walked through the narrow corridor, and reached the final door to the Rams. After closing the main door, I saw them at the entrance of their den. All four of them were sitting with their legs tucked in between their stomachs. So calm they appeared as they chewed and rocked back and forth. They stirred slightly, rose, and approached me. I swept my eyes across the room to acknowledge them all. Then my eyes. I intently settled my eyes upon the one standing in the narrow corridor, not knowing why I had let him out. I glanced at the animal. He stared back and waited patiently and calmly for my next move. I walked to the last door, opened it, and motioned forward for him to follow. No words were uttered. I opened the door, and he followed me out. His forelegs bent slightly in every time he took a step. My brother Esevi ran past me. Cujo pursued him.